Our guest is in the studio. Aaron Cheruiyot is the Senate Majority Leader. He is a senator for Kericho County. He's here in the studio. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Eric.
How are you doing?
Good morning, I'm okay. What about you guys?
Sisi tuko
thank
salama
you.
kabisa.
Very good.
As you see us, tuko chonjo.
Yeah, you all look
Tuko sasawa.
you look happy.
Yes. On this holiday, we're doing good.
It's a holiday. We have a lot to discuss
Very
for the
true.
next at least 1.5 hours with you.
Oh, okay.
And you're a majority leader. You're a leader of Kenya's parliament.
Okay.
So you carry a lot of weight. And to give you, your respectful position here, we'll start with Janet giving you the day's quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Today's quote is by renowned South African musician and activist. He was actually also in exile. You know, like I mentioned earlier, the fight against apartheid was everyone, whether you were in art, whether you were in politics. A lot of the people used their platforms to fight against it. Hugh Masekela was one of them. He came to Kenya many times, just sharing his gift of jazz. And he once said in an interview, when somebody goes around thinking that they are great, they are actually beginning their end. Yes, he said that a few years ago on the trend right here on Nation. Somebody goes around thinking they're great, they're actually beginning their end. Yeah.
Okay.
You agree?
I agree. Because it's others who should think you're great, not you yourself. So it's something, I think as a leader, it's you can relate. You begin to feel the time that you consider yourself great. I don't think you can ever reach a point as a leader and political in the space that you guys are in or anywhere where you begin to think, oh, I'm great.
Yeah.
That's where you fail. Even in sports, everywhere. It should be other people, not you. Yeah.
You were saying 50-50. You're like, do you think it takes away your status as being a legend?
No. It's true what he has said. I was actually reacting to the interview that he gave Larry Madowo here on the trend when he was told, but you're great.
But you're a legend.
But you're a legend. He said,
No,
I'm not.
Yeah. I'm not a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just say, okay, thank you. I don't carry myself as one, but I appreciate.
Yes.
I appreciate it when you do.
Yeah.
Not saying I'm not.
Yeah.
You cannot say, if you cannot say I am a legend, then you should also not say I am not a legend.
Yeah. I think it was his outlook. And in several interviews by the he would always be like, no, please don't call me a journalist.
Just relax.
He was warm about it. He wasn't mean like Usinite legend,
Like,
by
it's
the
okay,
way.
it's okay.
He was just like, no, I'm not. Thank you, but...
Stop it.
Oh, stop. Anyway.
Okay.
Senator,
Yeah. Yes, Eric.
you're a millennial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
So it's important for us to say that a millennial is a leader of the majority in parliament.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, let's take a tick on you. You're a legend. Don't say I'm not.
You're beginning.
But as a leader,
Yeah.
and you see what's going on in the country right now, we're going to be discussing a lot. Let's start with the current one, the current issue, which Gen Z shadow looms over Madaraka Day. You were there at the prayer breakfast last week when the president issued his, what the nation has called, half-hearted apology today. What Raila mentioned yesterday. And then let's look at the arrests of Rose Jerry, who is currently being held at the Pangani police station, as the latest that we know. Arrested on Friday. Family was there yesterday trying just to seek audience with her, can't access her. Her lawyers can't access her. And you're seeing all this reaction. When you see that, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Well, of course, it bothers me. To be honest, like I mentioned to you before we came live on studio, this is a story that I just saw snippets of it online. I was out of Nairobi from Friday, I think Thursday evening actually. And for us, when you're up country, it's a mad world out there. There's 1,001 things to do, people to meet and do this. So occasionally you get to see what's happening out of the circle of where you're in. You have meetings here and there. So I saw the story a bit that there's an activist who's been arrested, they've been taken somewhere, and I didn't follow until this morning when I was seated in your lounge. I watched what you guys were saying, that yesterday the family tried to access her and they couldn't. Her advocates also were denied access, which is pretty much not a good thing. I'm struggling to find the right word, not to say extremely bad things on a holiday morning, but it's not what we envision of a country. The thing that troubled me more, though, is the reason why she's been arrested, or what is being reported as the reason for her arrest. Then I thought, when seated there, then that probably could be the reason for her arrest. Why? I reflected back to the motion that we moved in the Senate immediately after the Gen Z protest. And part of the recommendations that we made is that Parliament needs to come up with ways of receiving public feedback beyond the traditional means. Many of these young people, they don't send their feedback to emails and the traditional way of sending feedback like we did. And we said perhaps they feel not included in the conversation because the channel that we use to receive feedback from citizens, they consider it to be either outdated or it's not their way of life. If you ask many of young people,
cumbersome.
even myself, I don't send emails that much, and I'm not even a younger person. Even my generation, you click on WhatsApp and you wish to communicate in an easier way. And that's part of the recommendation that we had made and said, when there are topical issues, things that concern the entire nation, we should find ways in which you receive feedback more easily. Of course, Parliament, being a public entity, sometimes some of these changes take time to infuse into the system. And what I'm reading and what I hear you guys saying is that he had actually made a platform for doing this. Of course, it's being said, oh, it's for rejecting or doing whatever. It's feedback anyway, whatever might be, either those who agree and those who don't agree, because that's in essence what public participation is about. There are things that once Treasury gives us a proposal as a National Assembly, we all share our feedback, and there are many things which we have to find ways. There are things which they continue to insist on, which many people reject, including those of us that were considered that you're pro the administration. There is a particular clause, for example, that I know of that have knocked off finance bill the last 3 years, you know, and I don't get the insistence, and it's particular to a specific lot of farmers, which is cane farmers, part of the people that I represent. They insist on removing transportation of cane from exempt to zero rated. And that will mean that it will be additional cost, because I can tell you the millers will not pass over the benefits to the farmers. And I don't understand why not tea, why not coffee. It's just coming. Cane farmers. So there has to be a proper way of feedbacking the system. And I thought what she had done was brilliant, unless there's something else that you're not being
Unless there's something we're missing. Still on that, I know we'll go deeper into even what you've just alluded to, but I'm just curious to get your honest assessment on how national leadership is handling public dissent, especially from young people and civil society. Your honest assessment.
In fact, I like your line of questioning, because I said this in Parliament the other day. The mistake that we make, though, is that we imagine that there is one button that runs government. Government is a huge, complex thing. You saw there's a time that we invited the various agencies. There's agencies that handle intelligence. There's DCI that handle criminal activities, ordinary administration challenges, which is the AP. And of course, they all fall under the armpit of the Inspector General. Constitutionally speaking, Janet, under Article 249 of our Constitution, the IG exercises independent, and that word is broadly and proudly mentioned in our Constitution. They exercise independent command over the police service. Even the Cabinet Secretary, when they want to ask anything of the IG, has to be in writing. Provisions of our Constitution, you know? So sometimes I get the sense that people imagine that the IG, we're still back in the Kanu or Kadu days, where the IG was under the tenterhooks of the executive, and they'd be called and told, Janet is not saying very nice things on radio. Can you go after her? We long left that particular station. It's a police officer leading an agency who sits down at Jogo House and all these other places where they exercise their command from, and imagine, how do I execute my work? How do I keep the country safe? How do I handle all these things that are happening? So there's something that they are grappling with, which unfortunately we misread many a times to imagine that there's somebody seated somewhere just calling and say, and many times, rightfully so, no, and rightfully so, people imagine that it's a president who calls and says, I don't like the voice of so-and-so. I can tell you 90% or 99% of the time, he reads it on the news just like you read it, that somebody has been arrested, and there is all this hue and cry. Of course, you have to be concerned as a leader of the nation and say, there's all this noise about what's happening. But we have never been able to pinpoint the correct place where we need to take this conversation to. The person that you need to seek out for and ask of their opinion of how they're trying to manage all this, could it be public dissent, demonstrations, all these things, is the Inspector General of Police, because that is a person charged with the responsibility of keeping the country safe. You know, unfortunately, we want to reduce it to be politics and paint and say this is a crashing of dissent. You have seen, last week I saw this and I felt bad because he's my friend. There's an MP from Kajiado who was arrested over an investigation of something. That's one of the closest allies of the president that you can think of in that particular. This is somebody who's worked with him like 20 years. And that I just mentioned to somebody and say, I wish people sometimes could understand and appreciate that there is all these agencies that keep on doing their work. That was actually an EACC arrest, not even the police.
Okay.
You know, so people, we must begin to appreciate that there is no one switch in government that all things flow back to. Our constitution decentralized power. There are agencies that operate on their own like a silo without any interference from anybody. In fact, what we are inviting the president to is actually what our constitution warned us against. They warned us against political interference from state agencies.
But there's somebody oversighting these.
Yes, it is IPOA. It is Parliament, you know, that needs to step on the button. The people now that we need to push, for example, the conversation to today with regards to the specific case of Rose Njeri is IPOA, and find out if a police officer is in charge of a station. If it is confirmed that this particular lady is at a particular station, the right to advocate is a guaranteed right. Right to visit by family is a guaranteed right for anybody under custody, be they a suspect or somebody who's done something that's completely off. These are constitutional guaranteed rights. So it's upon them to now impress and write to that officer specifically, because it's an officer who commands a station, and find out why exactly would you deny? What was the justification? So that we stop. We must begin to make it about individual accountability to specific officers. Then at that particular point, it will all make sense. Otherwise, we are trying to redirect the country back to a place where we left in 2010.
Right. I think the chain of command is important. And you're right, Inspector General of Police, independent office, but an appointee of the president who does report to the president directly.
No, he doesn't, unfortunately. They sit, the only nexus between the IG and the president is a National Security Council, where they all sit together.
Right.
And these are things that occasionally, together with many other challenges of security that happen across the country, will come up and be addressed. Unfortunately, this is not an entity that shares their conversations, for obvious reason, publicly, of the things that happen in their transaction. But like I have mentioned, the burden of responsibility
is on the Inspector General.
Needs to be on the Inspector General, IPOA, and of course us in Parliament, because we grant budgets, we vet them and grant their approval, and there are many things which the current IG had pledged to during his vetting, which probably now will be an ideal time to press and assess and say, these were the promises that you gave. You promise a dignified institution and all this and all that. Of course, this is something that we need to. There's generally.
I would love to see more of the pushback, the accountability holding, whether it's from the president, because he still can speak on it when something is not going right. Whether it's Parliament holding the Inspector General accountable, calling. Whether it's the National Security Council saying, Mr. IG, this is an unconstitutional arrest and there's a pattern we've noticed. These are abductions and it's a pattern we've noticed. There's disappearances and it's a pattern we've noticed. So that's what's missing, I would say.
Luckily for us, the news is tightening. There have been interesting court decisions the last few months, which is a good thing because it's in reaction to the public sector conversation about individual responsibility of an officer that's
Yes.
commanding an entity. I think
Yes.
there was Justice
Landmark
Mugambi ruling, if I recall correctly. There was also a decision on how to manage yourself as a police officer when handling huge groups of demonstrators and protest, as how you dress, identification, and all these things. That's a decision that's already part of our case law because it hasn't been challenged to the best of my knowledge. And these are applicable procedures which slowly by slowly are getting better. The speed is not what you'd expect because obviously as human beings, when you don't like something, you want it to change then. But in an entity such as a country, there'll always be pushback because let's face it also, it's not like police work is the easiest of it all. They find themselves sometimes in very challenging situations and therefore there's a reason why they behave in a certain way. Only that from where we sit and from the comfort of where we're going about what we do, us that are in a nice, decent place like this, we may not appreciate some of the decisions they make in confrontation with people. Some of them, not everybody means well, you know, in even a protest, to imagine. We have been in this town.
Yeah.
And you know that in a protest, there are people who want to take advantage of a situation, snatch even from the protesters themselves, harm them. So it's that dichotomy that we haven't been able to properly establish as a country. But nonetheless, this is not to make excuse for what happened to this particular lady. It's unfortunate. If what you are reading is what it is, then I'd really wish to sit and be made to understand how an app will make somebody an enemy of the state or whatever, the threat that they pose to national security. So it will be interesting to get the findings and know the truth. Yeah.
In all, it's the issue of people responding to a government. I don't want to say reacting, but just feedbacking to a government or to those in positions of authority at all levels, and what those in positions of authority then do with that information and how they engage. Last year, there were protests about the finance bill, and they were consistent. Parliament would do this, people would still come out and say, no, we don't like what you're doing. And in the end, it ended up with the president saying, all right, so we hear what has happened. But it came at a cost. It came at a cost where people died. More than 60 people died. Many disappeared. Many have not been found to date. We talk about the hierarchy of responsibilities. The person who bears the highest responsibility in the land is the president.
The president.
Right?
That's true.
You as a member of parliament, you swear to do your job diligently. And you have a responsibility as well of oversighting. Now, we'll talk about whether Parliament is oversighting the executive properly or not. But when it comes to issues of what we saw yesterday, it's a national issue. It falls squarely at the desk of the president. He has sworn 2 oaths of office, and I'm looking at them from the Constitution. One, the oath of allegiance of the president to the Constitution, where he says, I, William Samoei Ruto, in full realization of the high calling I assume as president, do swear that I'll be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Republic of Kenya, that I'll obey, preserve, and protect and defend this Constitution. Obey, preserve, protect the Constitution, which gives people the right to picket, the right to express themselves, the right to organize, and all. And he shall defend the Constitution and all other laws of the Republic. I'll protect, uphold the sovereignty, integrity, and dignity of the people of Kenya. One oath. Second oath is oath of due execution of the office, where he says, I will diligently discharge my duties and perform my functions in the office of President of the Republic of Kenya, and I will do justice to all in accordance with the Constitution. Justice to all. When more than 60 people die, when more than 100 are arrested, when many are maimed and injured, when many people disappear, and we say that we have an independent policing, police service, then clearly that police service has gone rogue. And it's time for the president to take up that responsibility and ensure that you straighten this wayward ship. Has he done that?
You see, Eric, there's a realization that perhaps from your reading of what his oath of allegiance is, I get the sense that you're yet to appreciate the point of argument that I'm pursuing, which is, if you invite him into action, you're actually inviting him into betrayal of the very act that he swore to uphold, which is respect this particular constitution. What is a constitutional edict with regards to how you carry out policing in this republic? I've told you, and you need to read Article 249, is that there is an independent office. Remember how the Constitution treats independent offices.
Yeah.
The Controller of Budget, the IG, the Auditor General, I think, and quite a number of them.
Yeah.
It gives them a silo kind of authority, where upon appointment, on nomination with approval of either Parliament or the National Assembly, they are left to go about their duty. The trigger process for either recalling them or finding them at fault is not from his decision. In fact, the point upon which he receives a petition to them, there is a process through which, if it's a judge, has to go through, let's assume for argument's sake that a judge of the High Court was to go rogue. If I'm to follow your line of argument, is to say, because as president, you bear the highest responsibility in the land, you have to find something to do. The Constitution doesn't give it a top-down approach.
Absolutely not, Senator. Here's my thinking. As president and head of state,
Yes.
when a police service has gone rogue, because this is what we are saying, the police service has gone rogue, what action do you take? Do you call the leadership of the country and say there's a rogue police service and we need to do something about it? Let's establish a commission of inquiry or something, because he has powers such as those. Let us say the National Police Service Commission.
Not of his own.
Yeah.
They start somewhere.
Not of
he
his own.
receives it in the form of a petition to
He
set
does
up.
not have to receive it in the form of a petition, and this is my argument.
Let me
He
hear
does
you.
not have to
Probably.
receive it
Maybe
in
I'm
the form
not
of a
listening
petition.
to you well.
When he told the country that he fired DCI Kinoti, he had not received any form of petition.
That's true.
Okay?
That's true.
He does not have, when people have died and people have, the National Commission on Human Rights has produced a report that says people have died. National Commission on Human Rights.
Human rights, yeah.
It's consumed in Parliament. There's a national conversation about abductions. And they have come even to him, direct petitions to him publicly. Mr. President, our children are being abducted. A listening president will hear that and he'll say, I am hearing that there is this going on. Just the same way the ODPP hears that there's a report somewhere and instructs the Inspector General of Police to commence investigations based on what I am reading in the public.
So motto.
The same thing the president can do based on what I'm seeing in the public, that there are people who've been abducted. I am seeing in the news that there are people who are missing their children. I start a process
of looking into it.
In this Kenya, where even the most well-meaning of initiatives become suddenly political.
Has he done that? We
must also appreciate the kind of country that you live in. Anytime you make any particular decision at the highest of office, this same media, which is your duty, and it's rightfully so, the public are always the first to remind you, no. That is against the law. It's not part of your responsibility. Let somebody else initiate it.
Is the president aware that people have been abducted?
Of course. He lives in Kenya.
Is the president aware who has been abducting people?
Of course. He lives in Kenya.
Very good. Here's what the president said just 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
When he was addressing a media conference in the presence of the president of
Finland,
yeah.
I think.
Right?
Yeah.
And he was asked about the abductions. He said this.
All the people who disappeared or who were abducted in what you said, all of them have been brought back to their families and to their homes. Statistics are arguable this way or the other way, but that does not take away from the issues that have been raised around what happened on the dates you have mentioned. I undertook to the country that being a democracy, and robustly so, that Kenyans must not, as has happened in the past, where Kenyans disappeared and their bodies were found in all manner of places, that that will not happen under my administration. I have given clarity and firm instructions that nothing of that kind of nature will happen again, and that it was my commitment as I became president that extrajudicial disappearances of Kenyans will not be part of what we are doing as a nation.
There is a president acknowledging that he has a duty and responsibility.
Exactly.
And there he is telling us that he has taken it upon himself as a duty and responsibility from the moment he took the oath of office up to that day, that such things will not happen. When they happen, what does the president do?
Of course, you see, like I mentioned to you, Eric, there's a process through which this has to follow. And I said, my line of argument before you interrupted me, Eric, was that it has to be a down-upwards approach in this way. There are constitutionally charged bodies whose responsibility it is to oversight the work of our police, that is IPOA. At the height of this conversation in the country when all these things were happening, they gave an update to the country and said we have commenced investigation, I think, into about 10 or I don't know how many officers that were suspected to have been involved in maiming and hurting Kenyans during that particular time. There is no report to date that has been brought to a closure. Wouldn't it amount to either executive overreach or interference into the work of an independent entity if he decided, you know, as a leader, even when you voice it alone, that's certainly something that you signal to anybody who's part of a country that you lead, that this is not official government policy. If there's somebody who was seated somewhere thinking that by abducting Kenyans, I'm doing a favor to the administration of the day, they know that that is certainly not your position. It's part of what you seek.
Sorry to interrupt you. We've just run over. We need to go into a break. We do need to come back, though, and continue this conversation. I think it's in the interest of everybody who's listening and watching.
Correct.
So we'll come back and really try and forge a way forward. So you are on Fixing the Nation on NTV and Nation FM and our digital platforms. I can see some of you already engaging us online. Continue to do so. We'll try and sample some of that feedback in the course of this show. We'll be back after this break. Yes,
Right.
but there's a bit of feedback coming in before we continue with the conversation. Jeremy Mutuma says, Jano, surely people will forget my full name is Janet, but it is well in YouTube. Kindly ask the Senator his thoughts about the source of money. DP Kindiki and KK leaders have been splashing in public gatherings recently, and if it's empowerment program or political tokenism. And I think that's in response to a newspaper headline that we sampled last week that showed the amount, the kind of money. Mamukuha says, is the Kenya National Police Service running a parallel judiciary? Why involve Parliament and the public in budget making and then arrest people involved in the process? Just read the new budget to us. But this is just what people are saying online with regards to the conversation that we're having this morning with the Senator in studio.
Simon Amboga on Facebook says, please ask Aaron if the president is really mean. I think really means his words when he talks, because how can people still get abducted day after day? Mariam?
That's it. I think that's a thing. And you have pointed out correctly, there are procedures, absolutely, but two things can coexist at the same time, that there is procedure and that the ultimate responsibility of all of this does lie with the president, as we've said before. And the fact that he has spoken about it, taken a stance on it, said that it will end, it will cease to happen, and it continues to then happen, or we still see things that look like overstepping or over police basically overstepping their role, then that does mean that either who is lying? Is it the president that has said that this will end and then it's not ending, or was there really never an impetus to end things? Because it is his words that these things are no longer happening, they'll no longer continue to go on, we've put an end. But then it's like, okay, what next? So those two things can coexist. There's a proper procedure, and ultimate responsibility does lie with the president.
There's something also that perhaps you guys miss. Before the coming into place of this administration, and that's why I was mentioning, unfortunately we were off air, that sometimes there's a lack of a wholesome countrywide conversation of the challenges that the nation continues to face. when the president says that I have worked hard, or I have stated it that it can never be part of our policy for abductions and this kind of things to happen in my administration, you must measure back on what exactly he's speaking to. Before the coming into place of this administration, there are various parts of these countries that kids will disappear, or people generally never to be seen. And many of the bodies that you hear him talk about are what, like would be found in Rivayala, in the Aberdares Mountains, and things like that. And that was made clear from the get-go that that should never be the situation. Many of those that were disappearing, perhaps particularly in the north and in the coastal regions, were because of Al-Shabaab and anti-terror police. That has been properly managed. You go to the coast, you go to northern Kenya, that problem has significantly subsided, and it's part of that voicing and saying it cannot be part of our policy that if you want to arrest somebody because of link to terror or whatever, you make them disappear. And that has significantly been handled. The issue of bodies showing up in forests, in rivers, and the same has equally not been reported. What we are dealing with is a particular phase or season in our country during the, what were they called, the protest, that people died, that people disappeared, and that is a phase that we are trying to bring closure to. And how do you bring closure to such a season? You ensure that there is justice for the victims that died, and what the former Prime Minister was saying yesterday, compensation for those that were hurt and maimed. That is what we are grappling with, and unfortunately hasn't been sufficiently addressed, if I hear what people are saying continuously. So the question that we must push this morning, if this conversation is to have sense, like I have said, Article 249 of our Constitution grants full authority to the Inspector General. There are two other players that are significant in this conversation. Number one is IPOA, Independent Police Oversight Authority. They told the country around July or August of last year that they have commenced investigation. This will be a time nearly a year into that incident to update the country and perhaps help us appreciate how long does it take to establish what went wrong, who's been charged, who's been found culpable, who's been declared innocent. This will be the most ideal time, better than any other time, because the conversation around the country is that we don't want to forget about that particular season so that it never happens again. 249.3 also provides that the Cabinet Secretary, and this is a part now where Eric has been pushing, because Eric's position is that as president of the country, you can't just sit in State House and say, even if it's an independent office that's running this, I should be concerned that there's something wrong happening in the country and initiate or find the mechanisms through which you right those wrongs. That is provided for in 249.3, where the Cabinet Secretary, in writing, can ask of the IG to give an update on investigations into certain things and the rest. Perhaps this will be the time for that also to happen through the office of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of internal security, to write and say, how do we end this particular culture of people being arrested, nobody speaking out. You know, we wouldn't be here speculating if somebody had said, we have arrested Rose Njeri because of the following. And this is why we have her in custody. That will bring this conversation that people say, okay. And why this is important is so that you don't have scenarios such as, like now, take the case of when they're in the right, like the case of the Juja MP. They've updated the country to a point that there is a level of believability in what they're saying, and people are saying, okay, so there's a waiter who's written the statement and said, I served this person up to such and such a time, and there's corroborating information, you know, then people believe and say, okay, if that is the case, then let the law follow its course. This would be the time for the internal security minister to perhaps write to the IG and demand answers on behalf of the executive, because he represents the executive in the architecture of keeping the country safe, and say there's been public outcry on this scenario where people consider that they have been arrested, and particularly not for anything, but for just voicing out political positions and things like that.
I'm cognizant that we might need to transition into
Right.
budget. This conversation, though, is pertinent. I think for anybody who sits in that chair, it will be very hard to avoid, especially coming up to a year into it. I know that we haven't felt a sense of satisfaction in terms of the bodies being able to come, whether it's the police, the IPOA. Yeah, there hasn't been that sense of urgency that was seen with the Juja MP. And I think we said that if that energy could just be sambazed across,
Right.
probably we'd be having a different conversation. Truth is, we haven't seen that level of energy, but I am cognizant that we need to transition, unless
Yes.
you guys into the budget.
Yeah, before we get into the budget, there's still this issue of the seeking justice,
Reparations, yeah.
right? MOU signed between the UDA leader and the ODM leader that says we shall ensure that there's justice for all and so on and so forth. And yesterday, Raila Odinga speaking in front of the president, telling the president, yeah, you give an apology, but what you need to do is also go into compensation for these victims. What mechanism needs to be in place to ensure that agenda item number 10 and number 6 of the MOU between Ruto and Raila is actually effected. Number 6, the right to peaceful assembly, compensation of all pending claims of rights victims. And number 10, protecting sovereignty of the people, stopping abductions, respecting constitutionalism, rule of law, and respecting press freedom. What mechanism do we need to have? Why does Raila have to stand up at a public to remind the president?
And we have that.
I don't know why he has to stand and remind.
In fact, before you even respond, let's just hear his words, his direct words of what he was saying yesterday.
Okay.
You've had several challenges. We have had a lot of issues. 2 years ago, we were on the streets. And even last year, they were on the streets, the Gen Zs. I saw that during the prayer breakfast recently this week, there was apologies that were being made. The speaker and yourself, which is wonderful as a first step to reconciliation. But then there's the issue of people who are injured, some people who died during that time. I want today to say that we should do compensation to families of those who died and those who are injured, so that we can have a closure to this chapter of our national history.
I'm aware.
You sat in NADCO.
Yeah.
Now answer.
I am aware that there have been a process of tabulating, and in fact, it wasn't just 2024 protesters alone. Remember, there were protests in 23 as well that were led by Azimio, where I think there were a number of people killed in those protests, and a significantly higher number of those that were injured. And there was a process of tabulation of all these people across the country, because there are many. It's not just here in Nairobi. There are other parts of the country where people were injured. And there were plans to compensate. But of course, given what government is, government processes are painfully slow most of the time. Yet, I think my undertaking to the viewers and the country this morning, because I reckon I'm a leader who sits at a place of influence and privilege, that perhaps given the kind of attention that the country, this particular incident has given to the country, that it appears at this point that nothing else significantly matters more than bringing closure to this particular very difficult phase of our country's history, then this will be the time to push and ensure that that is actually done, making sure that there is compensation for these people and justice to the victims, in the sense of finding those that were culpable, being held or responsible for their actions. I know there are 2 or 3 officers that I saw at some point being charged in court, but then that was it. They appeared, took a plea, and then never heard of it anytime.
The wheels of justice are slow, but they're hopefully turning.
Hopefully. This will be also an assignment for you guys, as I commit to do mine. Please seek out also the chairperson of IPOA, newly appointed to office, and get his perspective on some of these things. It will equally help that this push that you're putting to us from the legislature, or by position and proximity to power, saying on behalf of the executive, pass the same kind of pressure on them, because that is the only way we can perhaps bring closure to this and ensure that we move an inch closer. I don't like what I see sometimes with this particular space. It's only 2 years ago that we used to be on the wrong side of the political divide. And these things used to happen as well. And I recall how I felt at that time, being beaten while I've gone to Mau Forest to just say, why are you burning people's houses? The people have title deed. And you were beaten and threatened, almost shot at by police. And it felt very bad and angry. I would wish to reckon that now at a place where you have influence, that can happen to another person. That's not what we want.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
empathy demands, or not even empathy, leadership actually demands that we make it better and ensure that others don't feel what you felt.
And leadership
at a
demands
particular-
empathy.
Yeah.
Yes,
I was
of course.
about to
Okay,
say
that's
that.
that's a correlation actually.
The other battle
You know?
is the budget standoff,
Yeah.
and why we have it every year, Senator.
Every year.
That's
Yeah, why do we
that's how it should be, and it's a good thing for the country.
It's a negotiation.
Yes, it should be.
Is there a
Yeah.
permanent solution to
No,
this?
no, there isn't.
Should there be, guys? Do you think?
I
There
don't
should
know.
be a negotiation every time, and that's why I think that's what even the law provides.
Yeah.
That there'll be a negotiation. That
The right word is mediation.
yeah, mediation, right? No, mediation is after talks have broken down. You start with negotiating,
And then you mediate.
You negotiate. That's
And
why
then
they
if
go
that
to
doesn't
IBEC.
work-
The
Okay.
Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council,
Yeah.
the governors and the executive
Executive, correct.
seat, and they start having these conversations. This is how much the CRA has recommended, the Commission on Revenue Allocation, for budget. This is how much our functions are costing us
Right.
to run. And this is how much we need to run these functions, and this is how much is being collected nationally.
Yeah.
So let's see, how do we share this cake? That's a negotiation.
That is.
Right? Now, beyond that, then it goes into, now, of course, the push and pull. Then we'll go into mediation. Mediation is the unfortunate end. We should not be getting to mediation. We should be getting to these negotiations that are fruitful.
Yes.
That gets us to a level where
Yes.
those that control the purse, and that is parliamentarians, actually see the sense and see the people.
Who
They see the people as the beneficiaries. But unfortunately, what we see is we see two houses of parliament that are fighting for.
At loggerheads.
for dominance. I don't know. Can I be honest? This is one of the few times where I'll lean the other way. I think it is a good indicator of a strong democracy that this push and pull is there. You see it elsewhere in the world. People will even go to proper standoffs and shut down government and do this and that over budgets and all of that. So it doesn't really worry me. What worries me is, and because I'm speaking to a senator, I can ask, every year Senate will want more, counties will want more, but consistently when we get to the Auditor General's report, it's like, okay, this many counties were able to spend what is required of them on development, and you'll find it's like 6-10 counties that spend that much. This many counties had discrepancies or could not, were not audited properly, or lost this and this, or could not account for hundreds of billions and shillings. So I'm like, asking for money is one thing. Spending the money, accounting for the money is a whole other thing.
Let's take a break. We're coming to the top of the hour. Senator, stay behind for a bit until 8:30, so we can have this budget conversation. Senator Aaron Cheriot, Senate Majority Leader and the Senator from and for Kericho, is our guest. Keep it here for that. It's 8 a.m. on Nation FM and TV and everywhere we have a broadcast signal. Wanwachwado manatich.
Onge uchochezi.
Onge uchochezi.
Hey, that one,
Wanwaonge uoga.
that one, translation.
Yeah.
Moto. Well, if you don't understand, get to comments zetu. Someone there will give you translations
Oh, yeah.
for
Thank you.
every single
Thank
thing.
you.
That's the beauty of fixers. But we're back in conversation, of course, with Senator Aaron Cheriot. We're now getting into matters revenue sharing. And I was asking him even just before the break, setting context for this constant push and pull. And it's, I think, a good sign of democracy, maybe not. We can interrogate that later. But I wanted to know, as a senator for Kericho and a senator from Kericho, do you have different views on how revenue should be shared?
Maybe perhaps the one that should put me in a situation of conflict is Senator for Kericho and Majority Leader, because those are now two distinct positions.
Yes.
In the sense that one is what I'm duly elected to do, the other is a position that the party has granted me that serve and lead in a broader spectrum of leaders, you know, that push on a particular government's agenda. And that's what I find to be at conflict sometimes, because as I push for 465, which is what we've recommended as a Senate, I do that under the full realization that even the executive is still part of my responsibility, in the sense that I'm part and parcel of Kenya Kwanza, which is handling competing interest. And sometimes that resource, the fiscal space, is not there to the extent that I'd wish it to be as Senator for Kericho. So I find those two positions conflicting. But most of the time, you side with your primary duty first, because majority leader can go any day.
Come and go.
But at least this one is a job you have until a particular fixed time.
That's fair.
So that's what you try.
Before the break then, I brought the idea that counties will ask for more money every year and say, you know what, we're taking on a lot more roles. We need more money to be able to carry out our duties. We need more to do more, basically. And again, when an audited report comes out, it's counties are losing this much, counties are cannot account for this much, counties are only spending this much on development. They're spending a lot of their monies on recurrent expenditure, for example. And I'll try and reference the specific Auditor General report that talked about which counties spend the least and the most on development, which counties are able to account for their money is the best. But yes, so asking for money, one thing. Accounting for the money, a different thing.
I think the two needs to be, there is a relationship, but then they don't counterbalance each other. And that's a mistake that we make. There's a relationship in the sense that anytime you devolve public funds to any institution, be it a county government or a state agency, it should be put to prudent use. That's a standard across, and it should apply to the national as well as county governments. However, there is still the conversation to be had of, are we properly resourcing our counties to the point that they are economically viable, which is a completely different conversations. What I find to be troublesome, though, is that those that are not particularly keen on entrenching devolution in the country use the Auditor General reports of the malfeas and maladministration in our counties as a basis for denying them resources. If that was to be counter-flipped, then we'd say even the national government shouldn't remain with any resources, because Auditor General also raises concern about use of public resources in SAGAs, state agencies as well. So while there's a relationship, it shouldn't be the basis upon which you deny counties resources. We come as senators and part of the devolution family, we still hold the view that we are yet to properly resource our counties to perform optimally. What we're giving them is barely enough to survive. And most of them most of them only spend as little on actual development because of, first of all, it was quite a fairly smaller amount. However, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you raise a very important point. And last month, before we went on recess, there was a court decision. I forget the particular article of the Constitution. I don't want to misquote it. But, you know, we are constitutionally required to complete the audit process 6 months after the release of the report from the Auditor General. And county governments went to court, and therefore Senate was indicted, in the sense that we were considering reports even 1 or 2 years after the Auditor General had released their report. So we had a lump sum report of all the 47 counties for 2023-2024, which was presented, and we debated it around March or February, if I'm not wrong, of this year. And what you're saying is particularly of concern, and there's something that we are doing as Senate about it, because what happens in most of our counties is that there is a wanton expenditure pressure on the little resources that we are sending, without full realization of that there will never be a situation where you'll have sufficient resources for everything. So what our county governments need to learn and do is to aim to do better than the national government, in the sense that you learn from the mistakes of the 60-year-old national government for you counties that are 15. You know, it's that thing that you do as a young person looking at your father and saying, I don't want to end up like him. Unfortunately, the path that counties are taking, they will soon find themselves in the situation where the national government is, in the sense that with this continuous engaging of workers and wage bill, constitutionally, they shouldn't be doing above 35% by statute, regulation 25.
Let's pause there because
Okay.
we have a call and sometimes they may tend to drop off.
No problem.
Gikundi from Meru joins us online now. Gikundi, good morning. Would you like to share a comment or question?
Hello.
Hello. Gikundi, unatupata?
Yeah, you are speaking to Kundi from Meru.
Okay. Go ahead.
First, let me give me response to appreciate your MTV, Lucky, Janet, and Maria for this great conversation of enlightening Kenya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alafu ile kitu ingine ningeuliza, unajua hii budget ni ya Kenya, si kweli? And the Kenyans are supposed to be part and parcel of it. Na tukiangalia hizo budget kwa isomo hapo kutoka tusitishe katiba ya 2010, it is within the public domain that it is Kenyan property. And the Kenyans ought to be aware about it. Lakini ukiangalia kama huyu Mngomara amewekwa ndani ya sababu ya kutabiria Mkenya mwenye yule aelewi chochote kuhusu budget ili aweze kuelewa, lakini anawekwa ndani bila msingi wowote. Ukiangalia hiyo kesi haina miguu wala miguu, yani it is based on nothing. Rather than written and implemented in Kenya so that they cannot question about the abandoned, this is part of their property. Alafu kitu kingine, usually, we know always, in most cases, it is only in Kenya and Africa, whereby there is even abandoned corruption. Unaona pusta corruption inawekwa kwa abandoned. Na hizo vitu ndizo hawataki wa Kenya wajue. Ukiangalia zile mbanje zote zinapita, Wakenya wanakuwa updated ili waresi hizo, lakini wanaifanya kama siri. Kwani mbanje sio ya Mkenya ripota waibebe waendeleze kama siri? Wajua hata wabunge wengine hivi wanaogopa kuongea kuhusu mbanje instead of representing their people regarding all kind of process of mbanje.
Okay.
Asante Gikundi.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, he's talking about. We've had this conversation about budgeted corruption
Right.
for very many years. And the people who control the purse, again, Parliament. I always say Parliament is our weakest link. But how do you answer for that?
Right. Especially that part of our bunge ndio wanafaa kutuongelelea.
But sometimes also, don't gaslight them and over-sensationalize things that don't exist.
Okay.
Given the tight fiscal space that Kenya finds itself in today, some of the things that are said are actually not practical, or it's not possible if you comb through our budget through and through. I hear people say the issue of budgeted corruption. Budgeted corruption is alien to me. Why? Because every budget item has a vote head and a subline to it. So you go to Ministry of Defense, for example, and what they're budgeting for. What they find or what people speak about is perhaps maybe the cost of procuring either a service or a good from government or by government, actually, rather, is what they find to be either too expensive to the point that is what accounts for budgeted corruption. You know, of course. And what is it that is being done about it? I thought you saw last week, and this is part of the commitments that were made last year as a response to the calls for more accountability in the country, that this current financial year will be the last that will do public procurement offline. And from July 1st, all sagas are transitioning to, what is it called? The name is e-procurement. That's what I was looking for. Because that helps to keep a trace. You're able to go and see that how many firms did bid for that particular tender, what was the lowest quote, what was the highest. As it is today, you're not able to see that. So the cost of procuring goods and services is almost 2-3 times what is the average market price. I guess that's now what you would refer to as budgeted corruption. But at least something is being done about it. So sometimes people say you guys don't listen. But when I tell you such things, doesn't it confirm that we listen and we are proactive, try to make things better?
Yeah, I know there's some feedback, other feedback that we'll read to you, but the question about the amendment to the Constitution, I think it's something that we've been bringing up. I'm wondering whether especially if you look at how it affects the finance bill, for example, how does it benefit the public? Because it feels like it's more beneficial to one side, which is Senate.
No, Senate is not a beneficiary.
No,
Actually,
it's
it will be
one
the
of-
National
Yes.
Assembly.
But how does it benefit the public?
It benefits them in this way, and I hate to admit this, but CDF is a very popular fund. Why? Citizens find it to be more efficient than any other public fund because of the way its expenditure is stratified. You can only spend this much on this much on this. There's extremely a lean expenditure on what you'd call government largesse, which is staff compensation and the rest. I think it's a maximum of only 2.5%. So 97.5 goes to actual projects. And even those projects, there's thorough public scrutiny. When a member of National Assembly goes to a particular institution and says, there's a check grant to you guys of 1.5 million to put up 2 classrooms, citizens already know. How? That's not possible. In this part, we had transitioned to building a classroom at 500,000. So there should be 3, not 2. So there's that level of participation, and that is what has made CDF. And I have said this, I don't like saying it because as a senator, it's not something that I believe in, but citizens have appreciated that particular fund for its
The work,
efficiency
for the work.
and the work that it's done.
What
And
about consolidating all those monies, giving them to counties
that,
who are asking for more money?
You know what shocked me? Last year, we were doing the sugar bill. So in the sugar bill, there's the sugar development levy. And it needs, part of what the levy is supposed to do is to develop road infrastructure around the sugarcane growing areas. As Senate, when we were debating, and I said this very proudly on the floor, that this money, we'll have to ring fence it from our brothers in the National Assembly. This has to go direct to counties. I said, okay, fine. Then we went for public participation. And shock on me, citizens told me to my face that don't dare give that money to counties. Take it to Kera. We are able to see what they do. If you take it to counties, it will be eaten by the governors and MCS. So I thought maybe it's a unique problem of my county alone. I came back to Parliament and decided to read the report of the rest of the country, what people are saying. And this appeared to be the overarching theme across. So it tells you that we still have a lot of work to do to make citizens appreciate devolution and all its gain and what it can do. The challenge that we have is what you were alluding to earlier. The fact that people still find implementation of projects at the county level to be still either inefficient or completely not there. People find that if you give 10 billion to Kera, they can do X number of roads as opposed to you divide it across a 47 and do. So there's work to be done. This is not to make a case against counties. I can't do that because I'm a senator and nonetheless the majority leader. So I believe in the devolution family. But it's a challenge to us, which is what Mariam was pointing to. How do we ensure that we become so efficient that citizens, because at the end of it, who's the most fairest of arbiter in this conversation?
Citizens.
It's the public.
It's the recipient. of the
Because I
service.
say we're able to see what happens. So there's work for us to do in the devolution family, and we have to concede and appreciate that people don't see it in that way. They find we take long, it's costlier, the works are substandard sometimes. Of course, it has to be because these are just 10, 15-year institutions vis-a-vis comparing to a 60-year-old
that's been there for long.
that has been there, has set its processes and the rest. So we have to work.
Hard to
There's
make sure
work
people
to
understand.
be done.
Will you be voting for or against the constitutional amendment bill?
I will vote against because unfortunately Senate has taken a position. And for us,
Why are you saying unfortunately?
because I would have wished that we achieve that which we wanted, which is my personal view as Aaron is should CDF be part and parcel
Entrenched
of
in the Constitution?
entrenched in the Constitution? Yes. Why? Because the battle that we had in this country in 2007 was about resources, and 2010 the Constitution came as a realization of the need to decentralize resources. Anytime there's an opportunity to send more resources away from Nairobi, away from the National Assembly and direct to specific parts of the country because of marginalization.
They exist. They're called counties.
Sorry?
They're called counties.
Yes, of course they exist, but there are many other channels through which, you know, the problem is this.
Right.
There is on paper what is possible, and there is a political reality of what I know to be possible. The minute we fold back that resource and say, take it back to the national government, and there are two institutions here, the National Assembly, which has more power than us in the Senate, then chances are 70 to 80% of those resources will remain here at the center and not go back to Mashinani, where I expect them to be.
Yeah.
So it is that reality that makes me comfortable and say, let it go to the 290 constituencies.
This is the second week where somebody said there's what's on paper, and then there is, and that's very worrying. And there's what we know politically.
It's the reality.
It's
the reality of our politics.
It's not that we're not recognizing it. It's just the fact that there's something that governs us. And
Because
guides us.
if you're to say that, I think CDF is about, what, 40 billion or something? I'm sorry, I didn't check the exact figures. If you're to say that you revert that to be part of the national conversation, perhaps only 10 will end up with the county.
Can it be created in such a way that an MP has absolutely no role to play?
Even now today, truth is,
They have no
in
role.
law they don't.
In law,
But
the
in
politician
reality,
has no
In
role
practice.
to play.
you know, they call themselves patrons.
Yeah.
They don't procure, they don't determine the projects.
But they appoint the people who.
No, they don't, by
even-
the way.
they don't even do
people
that.
vote.
CDF
No,
board.
people
They don't even
no,
do
no, no.
that.
People vote for
Yeah.
Who goes on the CDF board?
their representatives
The CDF
voted
committee.
by the CDF committee is voted for by
the citizens.
citizens themselves. That's why this fund is very popular. Let's concede what's
The only thing
Where
is
do
that the
these
reality,
appointees come from?
the virtues
I mean,
virtual
the-
ground
Yeah.
is that the MP will have influence,
not just influence, significant.
influence
Yeah.
on the election of the CDF
Correct.
committee.
Correct.
Right? So, and that's where now the MP is not playing a direct role,
Because
but
chances
the
are,
MP is playing
a guy who
virtual.
opposed Eric in the election can never find himself sitting in that committee.
Yes. Yeah.
The supporters of Eric, who are the majority because he's a guy who was elected, will gang up and say, hell no, this guy cannot be anywhere near. You'll sabotage us. So there is still that control of the MP, might not be direct, but they'll influence who eventually gets into those positions.
And then they take credit for everything that then the CDF is doing. You see CDF tumejenga barabara,
Of course,
Jenga shule.
tumepeana bursary.
Shade ya boda boda.
That's a good one. because it's-
I literally
yes.
saw one just the other day, so I was like, oh yeah. But this.
But CDF cannot do that.
It's not
I've
allowed
seen.
to.
Yeah,
not allowed
no,
to. I've
it's
seen.
it,
It's
no, no,
what
it
she's
doesn't.
seen.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
But
It's
I've
not.
seen with
No,
my- What do
you
it's
see?
not. What you see
What you see is
is
that-
just philanthropy from a
Is
member
someone
of parliament.
campaigning?
In America,
CDF
Like
is
a
properly. By the
governor
way,
house, yeah.
make no mistake. CDF is properly governed. They can never spend outside their mandate. Never, because all projects come to an institution here called the CDF board, and you have to get an approval before you do it, which is almost what we also want our counties to have. Remember, I had mentioned to you earlier that when we were considering the 23-24 financial year and establishing the gaps that existed in our counties, we realized if we want devolution to work and work with the efficiency that's needed, there is a level of control that you must institute. We must be able to face our governors and tell them, the fact that you're executive doesn't mean that you have powers from here to the higher up heavens. There must be a box or a frame within which you work. If it's 35%, it's 35%, and you must file the mechanisms through which we bring. Unfortunately, 70% of our counties are now at 50% of wage bill, meaning in a county of 1 million people like the county that I represent, with a population of 1 million getting a shareable revenue of 7 billion, 3.5 goes to salaries alone. That is not the constitution design. And therefore, the way in CDF they are not allowed to go beyond a particular limit, we must also work to ensure that counties get to that
Also,
particular
they
level.
are ring-fenced the same way.
Yes, correct.
Health is devolved, right?
Perfect.
And the employer of health workers, by majority in this country, is the counties. But then there's this cadre of workers who were hired during the COVID
yeah,
pandemic.
UHC workers.
UHC workers who've been on strike and demonstrating at Afi House.
In
the
Parliament.
minister has said, I don't have a budget. They need to go to counties. counties have said we cannot absorb them. We don't have a budget. In fact, the chair of the health committee of the Council of Governors,
Governor Njuki.
Mudhomi Njuki of Tharaka Nithi, spoke last week. And let's just hear what he said, and then you can respond to this.
Okay.
The CS has issued a directive. He has purported that he's going to transfer the payroll for the UHC staff to the counties. And the position of the governors who are here today is that we will not be accepting a payroll that is not properly construed, because the UHC staff since 2020 have been on a job group that is very discriminative compared to their colleagues. They almost earn, I think, a third of the salary that the rest of the colleagues earn. That contract is coming to an end next year. We don't see the urgency that is there for the ministry to transfer a contract that is coming to an end in a year's time, when it has been on for the last 6 years, at the same discriminative job group that the UHC staff are out there about.
Nobody wants to own this baby, Senator. Yet these are workers who we have trained. Taxpayers have actually paid money to train these health workers. They have been employed, and yet now their fate appears to be in limbo.
They also held our hands through a pandemic.
Yep.
This is a difficult one. Difficult in the sense that there are resources involved, and you understand where the country is at the moment, and it shouldn't be misconstrued to say that I'm arguing against the absorption. Unfortunately, what you're seeing between the county governments and the national government is a push on the burden of responsibility, because what the national government is saying through the minister when he appeared before the Senate is that we are willing, if the National Assembly was to grant us the budget, to transfer these workers to the counties together with the accompanying budget. However, there will be a problem, and the problem is that which Governor Mudhomi Njuki is describing. Here will be a nurse, here will be a clinical officer or whatever cadre of person you're dealing with that has been paid as a particular amount when they work in the national government. When they eventually move to the counties, labor laws will not allow you to pay somebody less for doing a similar job to their colleague. So there's a labor compensation issue that will arise. Who will carry that particular burden is a discussion now that's up for everybody is now tossing around and saying, I don't want to take them. I believe...
Are there counties that have successfully absorbed their UHC workers?
None that I know of, to be honest. I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
And it will be a good thing if there are any that have done it, that they would share the same information or knowledge to the rest. Unfortunately,
If they did so, they poached them and maybe forced them to cancel their contract. You see, they have a contract with the national government.
Yes.
An employment contract. So unless you now terminate that contract and you left that so that you can apply and get a job.
Yeah, probably you could equally resign, given
resign.
that counties are paying better for the same service to what they were earning as UHC. They took it up, of course, because I mean that's the only job that was available at that particular time. What we need to do is eventually, even when you agree on the budget, it must be in the form of a conditional grant. The ring fencing that we were talking about a few minutes ago. Otherwise, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where that particular resource forms part and parcel of the shareable revenue. Then they get to counties and the conversation on wage bill arises, because wage bill is a live conversation in all the 47 counties as it is today. None of the counties are compliant with the statutory edict of 35%. And there is a push both from Senate, control of budget, county assemblies, that governors must begin to show compliance, because they're crowding the same challenges we have here in the national government of debt crowding our space. In the county, it is being crowded by wages and salaries, and that awareness exists. If we don't make it clear in black and white that these resources are part and parcel of the shareable revenue, but they are specifically for absorbing UHC workers, we'll find ourselves into that particular problem.
I know. Okay.
I take comfort, though, in the fact that when I watch the Budget and Finance Committee of the National Assembly, I saw the chairperson, Sam Atandi, say that we've had you UHC workers and we will consider you. We will figure out where to fix you. So I hope that that will be matched actually by action, because we'll see the report which they table, I think, later this week. And when they do that, then UHC workers will know whether they have been duped or what they are being promised is the truth.
Okay.
One of the solutions that you could consider, you as senators,
Yeah.
and even the National Assembly and the National Executive, just take money to counties. This thing of giving counties 400 billion shillings will not work. And then the national government is left with 3.8 trillion shillings. Just nothing. Devolve everything to counties, take the money to counties. You can even now start saying freeze.
I wish it was that
employment. Freeze employment of more workers at county level, so that then that percentage comes down. If you have more money and the employment of wage bill, the percentage will come down.
Okay.
But
I shouldn't be saying this, but what do you do with the rest of the things that we have? We have workers in the national government to be paid as well. We have national security to mind.
Those that do not need, the Ministry of Health does not need a 250 billion shilling budget.
If health is a devolved
If health is
function.
devolved. Agriculture does not need to have all these things that we are having at the national level. If agriculture is devolved.
You need to go through the
markets don't need to be done by the
line
national
items.
government
To
if
understand.
markets are devolved.
We need to-
And so on and so forth. But Senator, asante for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you.
Aaron Cheriot, the senator for and from Kericho County, and who is also the Senate Majority Leader, has been our guest for this hour. In the next hour, we have a conversation with who? We are talking to it's called what? The
Democratic
Citizens
Party.
DCP.
DC.
Okay.
DC.
Not
Right.
DCP, DCP.
Yes. DCP. Irongo Nyakera is the patron for Nairobi County, and he'll be joining us shortly. Keep it here for that. It's 28 minutes to 9.